Hello, everybody. So this is a really, really important study that was done globally in April, and what it actually says is that 3.4 billion people, that is 43% of the world's population, have disability right now due to brain, neurological, mental health conditions. We're talking all the way from autism to Alzheimer's. So that is the scale of the problem that we're looking at. And at our charity, foodforthebrain.org, which I represent, we break down the risk, or in effect the rules for what makes a healthy brain, into 8 domains. In the time that we have together, I want to focus on 4 biological domains, which I call the 4 horsemen of the mental health apocalypse. And the first one is brain fats. And I'm going to talk about omega-3, which you know about, and vitamin D, but maybe you don't know so much about phospholipids. And it's very important to understand where we come from, because our brains are 60% fat, if you take away the water, which contains both omega-3 and omega-6. And omega-6 is in the leaves of things, and it's in cold climate. It's very rich in kelp, but it's also in kale. And the most potent omega-3, which you'll see in a minute, that builds your brain, is found in marine foods, and marine foods in cold water. Ideally, cold water fish that eat fish, mackerel, salmon, and so on. And omega-6 is also vital, and we'll understand why in a minute. And the reason is because a genius man called Professor Michael Crawford in the 70s wanted to understand what sort of fatty acids there were in different species of animals and their organs, the liver, the heart, the brain, and so on. And he found, for example, in the liver that the type of fatty acids varied depending on what they ate, where they lived. It was all over the place. But every single brain of every single animal, from a mouse to an elephant, from a dolphin to a tiger to a human, every single brain in existence has 2 fatty acids predominantly. The main one is omega-3 DHA, which is a marine fat, and the other one is arachidonic acid, omega-6. And that's an extraordinary finding. And Professor Michael Crawford, who's about to celebrate his 94th birthday, and has written a superb book, The Shrinking Brain, would like to give you a message, and it is this.
Can I say that in 1972, we recognized that the brain evolved in the sea. The marine food web was a determinant of the brain, and if we don't change our food system, then the brain would go. I mean, simply, we lose our brains, we lose Homo sapiens, and it's the 6th extinction, the end of humanity.
You see, some billion years ago, a little organism, probably the dinoflagellate, much like an eye cell, incorporated a fat, a lipid, called omega-3 DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, hex 6 double bonds, which has a unique property of being able to convert solar photons into a nerve twitch, into electricity. So effectively, this creature got a shock, a twitch towards food. This is the origin of our nervous system and brain. Now, we split from chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas about 6.5 million years ago. Their brain size stayed exactly the same. A chimp has a 350-gram brain. Our brain grew and grew and grew to a size of 1,700 grams. And what's important about that is we're only 1% different in genes. So it had to be a change in the conditions of existence that created or supplied the nutrients necessary for brain evolution. And we are basically the waterside ape. We exploited wetlands, swamplands, estuaries. We started wading in water. And this is really how we became Homo sapiens. And in a classic example of that was David Attenborough, who said, I have never seen a vernix. A human baby is born with a waxy waterproof layer called the vernix. He said, I have never seen a vernix in any land-based mammal. I wonder if it exists in seals, and it does. The marine mammals have a vernix. The land mammals do not. And one of the things that has never been satisfactorily explained is how we actually see with such precision. How do those photons that enter our eye turn into the image of me and you in color? And he's just worked it out, at the age of 94. It's quantum physics. He's published the paper. It's quite cool. So really you start to understand that everything we see, hear, feel, touch, think goes through this network in the brain of DHA. And one of the scientists in my group, Professor Bill Harris, developed the most precise method of measuring your omega-3 status, which is the percentage of EPA and DHA in the membrane of your red blood cells. And that test will tell me how much brain you've got, literally. It measures the thickness of your brain, your risk for dementia, your cognitive function. And we know that even if you give young, healthy adults extra omega-3, you can get measured improvement in cognition. Now, you know that modern medicine is based on evidence-based medicine, and what that means is you've done a proper randomized placebo-controlled trial with the drug or the nutrient and placebo, and nobody knows who's taking what. And when you have enough of those randomized controlled trials, you pull them together into a meta-analysis. That is the basis of all modern medicine, and that is why if you are depressed, the first thing your GP will tell you to do is to take omega-3. It reduces your risk of depression or your severity of depression by 28%, which is more than double that of antidepressants. So if your doctor does not tell you to do that, you know one of two things. Either they do not read the British Medical Journal, or they've become inadvertently a representative of the pharmaceutical industry. And there are some things that are really so obvious. Once your shadow is longer than the length of your body, you cannot make vitamin D. So this happens somewhere in October. By November, your stores are getting low, December even lower, and they hit rock bottom in January and February, which of course are the 2 months where depression is at its peak and also flu is at its peak. I mean, it's so startlingly obvious, which is why the Finnish government told everyone to supplement vitamin D during COVID and had very few deaths as a result, and the British government tried to hide the fact. It really defies belief. Now, there are no recommendations for omega-3 in the UK, but children are told to have fish twice a week, and less than 5% of them achieve this. I've just been in Northern Ireland, where 50% of children are deficient in vitamin D. If you don't have enough omega-3, you cannot process emotions. So next time you see a child going off the handle, going into a complete hissy fit, losing control, this is so often a consequence of omega-3 deficiency. Many children eat no fish, have no omega-3 supplements, and therefore do not have the ability to control their emotional stability. I want to show you a film.
Your brain has 100 billion brain cells called neurons, making 100 trillion connections between them, communicating to each other with chemicals called neurotransmitters. Brain cell membranes are made from both phospholipids, which are abundant in eggs, which attach to the omega-3 fat DHA, abundant in oily fish. To make a brain cell membrane, they have to be bound together by a process called methylation. Methylation depends on B vitamins. If you lack B12 rich in animal foods, or B6 or folate found in whole foods and greens, your blood homocysteine level rises. Your homocysteine level predicts the rate of brain shrinkage as you age. Lowering homocysteine with B vitamins cuts shrinkage by over 70% in those with enough omega-3.
So you're learning that membrane that makes up the communication channel of your brain has phospholipids, it has omega-3, and actually is dependent on B vitamins. In Japan, where they eat a lot of fish, you get 10% omega-3 index. We have generally in the UK about 4%. Violent offenders are at about 2%. There's a direct link, according to WHO data, between a country's seafood intake and its homicide rate and its suicide rate and its depression rate. These are very well established. much. What's the richest source? Caviar, by far. And if you can't afford caviar, you definitely need to be smashing it. S for salmon, M for mackerel, A for anchovies, and S for sardines, and H for herring or kipper. Now, you might go, yeah, but what about farmed salmon? Now, when Michael Crawford was invited to Japan, they had him lecture in every single university. They broadcast it to the entire nature and to the whole nation. And at the end, they invited him to talk to their government. And the health minister at the end said, right, we must agriculturalize the ocean. And it's what they've done. What they've done is taken vast areas between islands, stopped all trawling, planted sea grasses and seaweed, studied the keystone species of fish that they want to bring back. One of them likes tubes. They've made artificial reefs that have entirely regenerated the marine food web. We have thousands of miles in the British Isles where we could be doing this, creating the conditions of existence to bring back the marine food web. I know we've heard a lot about mercury. We know it's a toxin, but the vast majority of mercury in the oceans comes from volcanoes, that is, fissures in the ocean floor. And people, in my belief, wrongly avoid fish because they think it's got loads of mercury in it. And of course it does, the big fish do. They also have selenium. The selenium binds to the mercury. And every study I've seen shows that the importance of all the fats that you get in marine food way exceeds that downside. I was talking to the psychiatrist who used to be in charge of the US Navy's health, a brilliant scientist at the National Institute of Health. And I said, how much omega-3 do you give to your depressed patients? And he said 4 grams, which is like 4 capsules. And I said, how does that work? He said, really well. They come out of the depression, they report a real sense of contentment. And the women, interestingly, report a much better sex life. It seems to enhance their orgasms. And I thought that was particularly interesting because you may or may not know that the last animal to leave the land fully and commit to the ocean is the dolphin, which has every single bone that you have in your hands and arms in its flippers. And in fetal development, it has legs, it has arms. So why did these creatures like the dolphin and whale fully commit to the ocean? It must have been something to do with what was going on in their brain, and they probably were just feeling a lot happier and having better sex. And one of the interesting things is recent analyses of the brains of whales and dolphins finds that omega-3, omega-6 ratio has not changed. So where are they getting the omega-6 from? And we now realize that's the purpose of the migratory routes, to go to the hot climates where the algae provide the omega-6 and then back into the cold oceans. So if I want to get anywhere close to what our ancestors used to consume, I have to both supplement omega-3 and eat fish. I have some chia, walnut seeds, etc., which are very, very good in their own right, but they will not really make sufficient DHA. Now, those phospholipids, which are rich both in seafood and in eggs, and if you're vegan, by the way, you can get omega-3 DHA, and you can get lecithin, which is high in phospholipids. One of the most important phospholipids is called phosphatidylcholine, and if you feed choline to animals in pregnancy, their babies are born with way more connections. And if you feed choline to pregnant women, you can measure a faster reaction time, speed of processing information by the age of 4 months. And if you give a high dose to a teenager, you can actually measure an improvement of memory in 90 minutes. And if your homocysteine is low, which means you've got good B vitamin status, you make more. And if you're pregnant and you're lacking sufficient omega-3 or phospholipids, the fetus will actually rob your brain to build its own. It's called Mummy, I Shrank Your Brain. And it's why many pregnant women report feeling dippy and forgetful, like they had half a brain. So I want to get phospholipids. I eat eggs. I can't believe that people still believe that cholesterol is the cause of heart disease. I mean, it was so many years ago that Professor Hugh Sinclair noticed, as we all know, that for every disease that exists, there's a country that doesn't have it. And the Inuit had no heart disease, and yet they ate the highest intake of cholesterol and the highest intake of saturated fat. And he realized it was their diet of seal meat. Seal is the richest source of DHA, by the way. So he ate their diet and proved that omega-3 protects your heart. It's not about cholesterol. Now, if your vitamin D level is low, you have 19 times increased risk of cognitive decline. If it's high, you have 4 times less risk for Alzheimer's. And if you supplement vitamin D, you cut your risk by 1/3. So it's worth knowing what your vitamin D status is, and you certainly want to have it above 75 nanomoles, probably higher than that, 100 nanomoles. And again, you know, with COVID, we saw how important this was for infection. The optimal amount of time to spend outdoors is 1.5 to 2 hours. Below that, you increase your risk of dementia. Above that, you increase your risk as well. And there was a very good article in The Guardian about how the climate crisis affects our brains. More heat and more radiation affects our brains. It made me think that if Elon Musk is going to be beaming us all down with 5G from above, maybe someone should create a nice soft floppy hat that has a mesh in it that can stop the radiation affecting your brain, because it does. So that's the first horseman of the mental health apocalypse. The second is methylation. Methylation is to do with B vitamins, and if you don't have enough B vitamins, your homocysteine level goes up. Methylation is the orchestra of everything. And if you don't have the B vitamins and your homocysteine is high, you start to make brain toxins like p-tau and NMDA, and it damages your arteries. Homocysteine is really, I wrote a book on it in 2003 saying it's the biggest medical breakthrough of the century, and that statement is true. Over 100 diseases are predicted by a raised level of blood homocysteine. I mean, things from cancer to osteoporosis to macular degeneration. The reason why women are recommended to have folic acid in pregnancy is to lower homocysteine, improve methylation. It's such a fundamental thing. Anyone with any neurological disorder, from Parkinson's to bipolar, schizophrenia, motor neuron disease, multiple sclerosis, you have to be looking at homocysteine. I'm going to show you a film on how it works.
Food protein contains an amino acid called methionine, which turns into a toxic amino acid called homocysteine, en route to making SAMe, which is the good guy, a methyl donor. The dots here are the methyl groups. They help make neurotransmitters and phospholipids, control genetic expression, even repair DNA. Where do the dots come from? The answer is food, folate. It's a B vitamin rich in greens. You also need B12 and B3 and B2 and B6. And there's another pathway that needs TMG and zinc. If you don't have these nutrients, you can't do methylation and your homocysteine level goes up.
So in essence, don't ask me if you need B vitamins, ask your body. If your homocysteine is above 10, your brain is shrinking. And in fact, there was a study that came out today which showed that if you have a high homocysteine and a low omega-3 and a low vitamin D, you've increased your risk of Alzheimer's by 4.6 times. Now, I'm 66. The average person at my age will have a homocysteine above 12, which means brain shrinkage. You don't want to be average. And my scientists say that above 10, we really need to treat with extra B12, 500 micrograms, B6, 20 milligrams, and folate. Now, the RDA for B12, which stands for the ridiculous dietary arbitrary, is 2.5 micrograms. So if your homocysteine is high, you need a lot more B12. And a lot of this is because you're not absorbing it. A remarkable number of people, probably half all over 65, have brain shrinking right now as a function of a lack of homocysteine, which is really easily lowered. And this understanding came out of the brilliant work of Professor David Smith at Oxford University, who was the vice dean of their medical school. And he did a study where he gave people either placebo or B vitamins, measured the homocysteine at the beginning of the study, and measured the rate of brain shrinkage. And basically what you're seeing here in the blue is the higher the homocysteine was, the greater was the rate of brain shrinkage. Then those who got the B vitamins, their brain shrinkage in the high histamine group was 53% lower. And when they looked at the actual Alzheimer's related areas of the brain, there was 9 times less shrinkage. And Alzheimer's, by the way, is 62% of dementia, and it's only possible to diagnose Alzheimer's with a brain scan developed by this team and used internationally, which looks at the central area of the brain, which includes the hippocampus. And that was the area we heard earlier speakers talking about that is affected by the vaccine. So we know that homocysteine is causal. In other words, if you lower the B vitamins, if you increase the B vitamins, the homocysteine comes down, the brain stops shrinking, you don't get the clinical dementia symptoms that occurred before. It's completely consistent with modification of the disease process. Then a few years later, they realized that the brain needs omega-3. And the omega-3 and the B vitamins work together. So they didn't give omega-3 in their study, but they went back and they looked at the third with the lowest omega-3 in their blood, and they found no effect of the B vitamins, no benefit. And the third with the highest amount of omega-3 in their blood had 73% less brain shrinkage, which brings the shrinkage down to the level that you find in normal people with no cognitive decline. In other words, they had stopped the brain shrinkage, which is the hallmark of Alzheimer's, and 30% ended the year with no clinical dementia rating at all. In other words, could not be diagnosed with dementia. And then an omega-3 study, which had failed, which had given a decent amount of omega-3, 2.3 grams, to people with Alzheimer's, perhaps too late in the process, went back to their original blood samples, and they looked at the homocysteine level, and those with a higher homocysteine, lack of B vitamins, no benefit at all. But those with the low homocysteine had a massive clinical effect. And then another big study in Holland, in fact by the same author who just published a study today on the homocysteine and the vitamin D. They had a bit of an effect from giving B vitamins, but they went back to their blood samples and they found that those with low omega-3, DHA, had no benefit at all. But those with the high DHA had a really major effect. And then a study in China gave folic acid or DHA or the combination, and it was only the combination that worked. So where we're at right now is that B vitamins with omega-3 reduces brain shrinkage by 73%, B vitamins by 5.2%. The last anti-amyloid injection, this is the new drug that they're trying to sell you, anti-amyloid antibodies, actually increased the rate of brain shrinkage by 20%, which was not reported in any national newspaper when the studies came out, but it was right there on the second page of the journal. Actually, the Telegraph did finally pick up on it. So what's happened is that these anti-amyloid drugs have just managed, with a bit of jiggery and pokery, to get to the point of statistical significance, but no clinical significance, no effect that a person or their carer or their partner or their doctor would actually notice. And the process is such that in the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, when a drug applies for a license, there are 10 experts and they get to vote. And 9 of them voted to not give this drug a license, 1 of them abstained, and they gave the drug a license, and 3 of them resigned in protest. So that's what's happening. A fraction of the clinical dementia effect. But it's worse than that, because in the last 2 trials, there were 7 deaths. And a third of people are getting brain bleeding or swelling, which means with every injection of this anti-amyloid antibody, the poor patient is going to have an MRI scan. The total cost is £50,000 to £60,000 a year. And the NHS, which is Britain's fastest growing failing business, is actually gearing up for this. It's extraordinary. So everyone in the field knows that this idea that the amyloid deposits that do occur in the brain are the cause of the problem knows that this is a busted flush. The amyloid is there. The drugs, by the way, do lower amyloid successfully, but they have no clinical effect because this is not the cause. So everyone is now talking about something called p-tau. Tau is a protein, p-tau is a toxic protein that accumulates in the brain and produces tangles of nerves. And what we happen to know is that if you have a raised homocysteine, lack of B vitamins, you can't clear p-tau from your brain and you actually start to produce more p-tau. So we know how to prevent p-tau. It's with B vitamins. And, you know, that's kind of where it goes. And if you want to lower your homocysteine, which is so easily done, you just take a supplement that contains the homocysteine-lowering nutrients. My wife and I, we recently at our lab with the charity developed an accurate method for measuring homocysteine. So we both send in our blood samples. We're both in our 60s. My level was 7, which is okay. Hers was 15, which is brain shrinking zone. She takes 2 supplements a day to lower it, retests in 2 months, and her level is 8. So it's really easy to bring homocysteine down. What is an optimal level? If you look at chromosomal damage, it starts to occur above 7.3. But here's an interesting study. This is healthy women who become pregnant, and those who had a homocysteine level above 9, which is not at all uncommon, at the age of 6, their children are significantly more withdrawn, anxious, depressed, have more social problems, including aggressive behavior. And yes, we've now found a way to measure it accurately with a home test kit, pinprick, under 50 pounds. It's kind of a bit of a deal breaker. And in case you didn't know, since homocysteine is made from protein, from methionine, if you ate a steak, your blood test would be higher. A double espresso will raise it by about 13%. So you want to have the blood test on an empty stomach first thing in the morning.
If you give a builder some timber, do you get a house? No. If you give them a bag of nails, do you get a house? No. If you give them a hammer, do you get a house? No. But if you give them timber, nails, and a hammer, then you get a house. You can't build and maintain a healthy brain without enough of the right building materials.
So every day I take B vitamins, I take extra omega-3, and I also take phospholipids. I use lecithin capsules, which are very inexpensive and vegan source. So don't forget your vitamins, omega-3 and DHA. That's our second horseman. The third horseman is sugar. Sugar damages your brain. We actually see in teenagers with sugar problems the same areas of the brain shrinking that we see in Alzheimer's, the same type of cognitive decline. The youngest age of a non-genetic Alzheimer's, and by the way, less than 1% of Alzheimer's is caused by genes. The youngest age of a non-genetic Alzheimer's diagnosis is age 19. This is a study of people in midlife who have a apparently normal glucose level, but high end of, and already they've increased their risk of Alzheimer's disease by 14.5%. I think you know that when you eat too much sugar, you produce insulin. Insulin is the hormone that takes the sugar out of your blood into your cells, for example, into your brain cells. And the more sugar you eat, the more insulin you produce, and eventually you become deaf to the effects of insulin, which is called insulin resistance, and you have to make even more insulin, and it doesn't work. So the irony is the effect of eating too much sugar is your brain ends up starved of sugar, because there's no functioning insulin to get the glucose into your brain cells. So you start to get brain fog and a craving for sugar. That's what happens. And it's the insulin that does so much damage. So in the world of nutrition, where is it? Yeah, we've learned how to lower insulin with a low glycemic load diet, or some people like a keto diet, or some people fast a day a week. Some people do 18-6, where you have dinner at 6 and lunch at 12. So you do all your eating in a 6-hour window and have an 18-hour fast. But whatever you do, what you're really trying to do is get back your insulin sensitivity. And the best blood test to determine where you're at is the one that doctors use to diagnose diabetes. It's called your HbA1c, or sugar-coated red blood cells. And if 6.5% of your red blood cells are sugar-coated, then you're diagnosed with diabetes. 6% is pre-diabetes. But we see brain shrinkage above 5.4%. So you want to get your HbA1c down to 5%, which is 31 millimole in the UK system. And yeah, I mean, that was just showing you that it's the glycemic load of a diet that actually predicts your insulin response and your satiety, how hungry you are. So there are kind of two ways to lower your blood sugar. One is to eat less carbs and eat the ones that release their sugar slowly, which kind of means more fiber. It's a simple thing. Have you ever eaten 3 oranges in one go? Probably not. It's really hard work. Have you ever drunk a glass of orange juice? That's 3 oranges. Nature never gives you sugar without fiber. So eat your fruit, don't drink it. The other way is to go ketogenic, where you really cut out the carbs and have high fat, and they both work. And I've written lots of books about this. The hybrid diet compares the two because we do have the ability to run on glucose or ketones. And our body is always looking for a source of energy. It loves carbs. I never kind of completely bought into the idea that we should always be ketogenic. Because, you know, it takes about 3 days to get into ketosis. It takes about 3 minutes to get out of it. So, you know, the human body likes carbohydrates. But one of the big breakthroughs here has been that ketones, which are a direct source of fuel for the brain, are made in the liver from fat. And they're not made from any fat. They're made from a very specific kind of fat, which is a type of medium-chain triglyceride, which is 8 carbons long, or C8. So we now know that it's C8 in coconuts, about 7% of coconut oil, by the way. So we're extracting just the C8. And that, your liver will help to make ketones, and the ketones power your brain. Professor Stephen Kinane is our expert on ketones, and what he's done is to feed people with pre-dementia with 2 tablespoons of pure C8 oil, and it doesn't affect the energy produced from glucose, but you get a 230% increase energy from ketones, and their cognitive abilities improve. In other words, he's filling the energy gap. So people with dementia, for example, will crave sugar because their brain is saying, I need fuel. The glucose is not getting through because the insulin isn't working. But if you give them some sea oil, their brains come back to life. So that's a kind of quick win. So that's the third horseman of the mental health apocalypse. The fourth is oxidation. I want to explain how this works. We are an oxygen-based life form. We react oxygen with glucose to make energy, in the process of which we make the oxidants, which are the exhaust fumes, and those oxidants ultimately age you and kill you. That is why we have a finite existence. Vitamin C is a water-based antioxidant. Vitamin E is a fat-based antioxidant. It will help deal with French fries, for example. And vitamin C can reload vitamin E and put it back to work, recycle it. And vitamin E can recycle vitamin C. And that's happening outside of cells. Inside cells, the most potent antioxidant is glutathione. Glutathione is itself recycled by anthocyanidins in blue-red foods. And also coenzyme Q and lipoic acid have a part to play. So these are the team players that keep you healthy. So I want to do 2 things: eat as much of them as possible, also supplement them. And I want to eat all those brightly colored foods, organic, beetroot and turmeric and mustard and blueberries and butternut squash and all the rest of it. But I'm always going to supplement vitamin C because, in case you didn't know it, every single animal on the face of the planet makes vitamin C, except for very few, which include primates, the guinea pig, which is why the guinea pig is the guinea pig. It has the same faulty chemistry that we do, inability to make vitamin C. So I want to supplement vitamin C. And if you measure the total antioxidant capacity in people's diets, this is a study on several thousand people, and those who have the highest intake of antioxidants cut their risk of decreasing memory in half. And glutathione is really important. It's a bit like you've got all these metabolic fires going on inside your cells, your mitochondria, and the fire truck is full of water, which is the glutathione, which puts the fire out and then becomes steam, which then becomes oxidized glutathione, which is called GSSG. And then the glutathione is recycled by vitamin C and also by NADPH, which depends on your intake of niacin. And recently, we've actually discovered how to accurately measure the glutathione index, which is the ratio of the fully loaded glutathione, GSH, divided by the spent glutathione, GSSG. So at our charity, I mean, by the way, by the end of this year, we will have tested 500,000 people. It's all charitable. It's all citizen science. And now we've developed this kit. where you can prick your finger, measure your homocysteine, your omega-3, your vitamin D, your HbA1c, and your glutathione index, and get an actual measure of all those 4 horsemen of the mental health apocalypse. And just before I close with a final story here, I want to tell you that there was a study in Newcastle, a very good study, and it found that cats got the same variant of COVID as their owners. None of the cats died because they make vitamin C, but they could still get COVID. And I thought it deserved a kitty titty, which goes like this. There once was a cat who got corona from her owner. She said, "Don't stroke my pussy, she's trying to self-isolate." The pussy got in such a state, no strokes, no treats, so just ate mice, which was nice, but she didn't wear a mask or bend the knee, just took extra zinc and made more vitamin C, which just goes to show that if you're a smart cat, sanitize your tongue and lick your coat and go easy on your felicitations. Especially from strangers with a cough or sore throat, and stay away from vets offering untested vaccinations. So I just want to end with the story of Alan Norris, or Nodge. His wife Dorothy kept finding him in different rooms at night because he couldn't find the bathroom in his own house. He was diagnosed with mixed dementia, which is Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. He was a computer programmer. He couldn't turn his computer on or off. He was a gardener. He couldn't even contemplate the idea of tomorrow, let alone plant out his garden. He couldn't eat and talk at the same time. And they asked the doctor, "What can we do?" And they said nothing. But they found our charity, foodforthebrain.org, and you've all got a card on your chair. And they did the online test, the cognitive function test, which is free. And it is an accurate measure. It's the digital version of what they do in memory clinics. And he was in the dementia range. You then fill in a questionnaire, and it works out exactly what's driving your risk. And then they got on it. And they took 2 tablespoons of that CA oil, quit the sugar, went ketogenic 5 days a month, started going to bed a bit earlier to get some sleep. He's joined a Morris dancing group. I don't know if that's good for you or not, but he's turned his oranges into yellows and his yellows into greens, and his dementia risk index has gone from 56% to 37%. And he's planted his whole garden, and he's back on his computer. So the real message is that Alzheimer's is not a natural consequence of the aging process. It's a disease that you don't need to get, and you can prevent it. And that is why I've written this book, Upgrade Your Brain. And if you read Caduceus magazine, you will have seen it in there. And if you listen to John Campbell, we did a whole interview on this very subject. Here is Dorothy and Nodge. I got my husband back from dementia. So please do the test. Tell everyone you know to do the test, because we are starting a revolution. And if you're a practitioner, you can actually, we'll give you a code, like your name, and you can ask all your patients and clients to do the test, and then you can watch in real time your group of patients and how they improve over time. So you can become part of this citizen science revolution. Everything we do is funded by being a friend of the charity. And the interesting thing, you might not have quite clocked this, but the biggest database in the UK is called the UK Biobank. It's 500,000 people's data. And the biggest in America is called NHANES. It's 200,000 people data. We expect to be at 1 million people by the end of next year. All charitable, all funded by people like you, citizen scientists. And therefore, everyone who wants to do research on dementia will need to come to us to actually see what's going on. This is how we break through and make prevention actually happen, because it's not more money, it's not more drugs, it's not more doctors, it's not more nurses, it's not more paramedics that will save our health service, it's less patients. And you'll never get less patients until you do prevention. And this is how we can do prevention in the digital age. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.